He jokingly kissed a 300-year-old statue, then she awoke and whispered, "I've been waiting for you." Sergeant Maddox Quinn wasn't supposed to be there. The planetary ruins of Arrakis were off limits to all non-scientific personnel, but a long-range recon drone had crashed just on the edge of the dead zone and someone had to retrieve the core. Maddox volunteered not for glory or protocol, but because the war had drained him dry and he needed silence more than he needed orders. The trek through the ash-blown jungle left him bruised and aching, but something about the stillness, how the trees bowed away from the ruins as if in reverence, kept him moving. He found the stasis dome by accident, half swallowed by stone and moss, pulsing faintly like a forgotten heartbeat beneath the surface of the earth. The chamber cracked open with a sigh of warm vapor and age-old dust. Inside stood a statue, or at least what he thought was one. Tall, regal, a female figure carved from an unknown metallic stone that shimmered faintly like skin kissed by stars. Her face was serene, her eyes closed, her mouth gently parted as if frozen mid-whisper. Her armor was unlike any design he'd ever seen, elegant and ancient, laced with runes that responded faintly to his breath, glowing each time he stepped closer. He stood in front of her for a long time, resting his hands on his hips, lips pressed in disbelief, alone beneath a dying sunbeam filtering through the cracked dome. "Well," he muttered with a tired grin, "here's to you, pretty lady." With no one around to witness his impulsive idiocy, he leaned forward and gave the cold, perfect lips of the statue a small, mocking kiss. It was meant to be nothing, a soldier's joke to himself, a moment of levity in a lifetime of loss. But the second his lips touched stone, the air turned electric. The statue shuddered with a quiet exhale, and every glyph in the chamber ignited with golden fire. Maddox stumbled backward, reaching for his rifle, heart hammering, eyes wide. The statue opened its eyes slowly, gracefully, as if waking from a dream 3 millennia long. Her irises were galaxies caught in amber, and her voice, when it came, was neither shocked nor afraid. "I have been waiting for a handsome human like you all my life," she said, and the stasis chamber wept light. Maddox froze, his hand still on his weapon, mind scrambling to explain what he had just heard. "The statue, no." The woman stepped forward, her joints unfolding with unnatural elegance, as if time had bowed around her rather than calcified her. Her skin shimmered faintly with living metal, and as she moved, light followed her like a tide pulled by moons. She reached out a hand, not with the stiffness of a reanimated corpse, but the reverence of someone greeting an old friend. He didn't take it. Instead, Maddox took a cautious step back, scanning the chamber for any sign of traps, hallucination fields, or AI projection nodes. "What the hell are you?" he asked, voice hoarse. She smiled, not with malice, but with the quiet amusement of someone who had waited too long to answer that question. "I am Sir Raphael of the Orion Crown," she said, each syllable a thread of history pulling taut around them. "Queen once, ghost always, until you." Her voice carried power, not just because it rang like wind across ancient bells, but because it held sorrow behind every word, a weight that spoke of kingdoms lost and memories buried beneath centuries of silence. He shook his head, unable to reconcile the facts. She had been stone. He had kissed her as a joke. And now she stood before him, breathing, radiant, sentient. "Why me?" he muttered. "Why now?" She turned toward the glyphs on the chamber wall, tracing them with a fingertip. Where she touched, they responded, unfolding fragments of memory in floating glyphs, flickering like the thoughts of a sleeping planet. "You carry the blood of risk," she said. "The foolishness to mock death and the heart to mean it." "It was not the kiss that woke me, it was the fire beneath it." Maddox laughed, half mad from the awe and terror of it all. "Lady, I've been called a lot of things in this war. Fire ain't one of them." Seraphael turned to him, the faintest smile curling her lips. "You are wrong. You are emberborn. You are warmth in a universe that has grown cold." He didn't know what to say. The chamber dimmed, as if responding to the gravity of her words, and outside the dome, the wind stilled. Maddox realized the war, the mission, the drone core, none of it mattered anymore. Not here, not in the presence of a woman who should not exist, and yet had called him across time with nothing but stillness and the memory of touch. And deep down, he knew nothing would ever be the same again. The sun had nearly vanished by the time Maddox led Seraphael out of the ruins, the broken twilight bleeding violet across the sky. Her bare feet moved without a sound, as though the world itself dared not disturb her stride. Maddox kept glancing sideways at her, unsure whether to treat her like a VIP, a relic, a threat, or something holier. Her eyes shimmered in the dusk, and he knew without understanding how that the moment he kissed that statue, his life had detached from the rails of normality and was now hurtling through something ancient, untamed, and quietly divine. They reached his outpost, which was nothing more than a buried prefab bunker camouflaged in earth and moss. The moment he opened the hatch and stepped down, motion sensors triggered the comms terminal. His presence alone wasn't enough to fool the system into silence anymore. Red light blinked frantically across the interface. Unauthorized presence detected? Confirm with ID signature. Maddox cursed under his breath, turned to Seraphael and said, "You better duck." The alarm sounded before she could ask what that meant. Automated turrets blinked to life, their targets locked on the anomaly behind him. And Maddox did what no sane soldier would do. He stepped between her and the guns. "Override. Override." He shouted into the comms mic. "This is Sergeant Maddox Quinn. She's with me." The turrets hesitated, sensors confused by her readings. Her biosignature didn't match anything in the database, not machine, not alien, not entirely organic. The system stalled, conflicted. Seraphael lifted one hand, palm outward, and Maddox swore he saw a light thread between her fingers like strands of old starfire. She whispered something beneath her breath, something in a language that cracked the static with harmonic reverberation. The alarms died, the lights stilled, the guns powered down with a mechanical whimper, like beasts retreating from a superior predator. Maddox stared at her, jaw slack. "How? What was that?" "A memory," she said simply, "of when machines bowed to us without question, before they forgot who we were." He led her down into the shelter, where maps and weapons cluttered every surface. Seraphael touched a tan rifle with delicate fingers. So much pain forged into such small things. Maddox sat, trying to find a place to rest his thoughts, but there were none. Not after today, not after her. She took a seat across from him and said, "Tell me what your world has become." And so he told her. For hours, Maddox spoke of Earth, of war, of the fragmentation of galactic peace and the broken treaties written in ash. He spoke of the losses, the futility, the planets turned to cinders, the civilians caught between alien armies and searing counter-strikes. She listened, expression unreadable, her fingers clasped before her like a priestess listening to the confession of a dying star. Then she said the words that ended chapter 3 like thunder. "Then perhaps I was not awoken to remember. Perhaps I was awoken to change it." The next day arrived with too much silence, no birds, no breeze, not even the faint hum of drones patrolling the outer boundary. Just stillness so complete it itched. Maddox rose early and stepped outside with a weapon slung over his shoulder, his gut already twisted with unease. When he checked the sky, he found his instinct had been right. A low-altitude recon vessel hovered just beyond the tree line, too high for standard infantry, too low for civilian patrol. Someone had seen the anomaly. Someone was coming. He went back inside fast. Seraphael was already awake, standing in front of the mirror with her reflection dancing strangely, like it was remembering what it once was. "We don't have time," Maddox said. "Command will be here in minutes. They'll want to take you." She turned to him with calm certainty. "They won't. Might want to hold off on that confidence," he muttered. "These people dissect their own soldiers for breathing the wrong way. Use something they don't even have a word for yet." The ground rumbled as the first dropships arrived, landing like angry gods on the ash-covered soil. Maddox loaded his sidearm and stepped outside, hands raised. "Sergeant Quinn, you are in violation of Protocol 9, barked the officer leading the retrieval team. "Stand down and surrender the subject." Maddox didn't blink. "She's not a subject. She's a person." Behind him, Seraphael stepped into view, and for a heartbeat, the entire retrieval team faltered. Even trained killers froze at her presence, unsure if they were staring at a weapon, a miracle, or some myth brought to life. "I am not here to destroy you," she said, her voice like distant thunder under silk. "But if you try to cage me, I will remind your machines of their makers." And then it happened. The lead officer raised his rifle. The sky shattered. Drones fell from the clouds like they had lost all command. A complete blackout. Turrets turned and aimed upward, locked on their own command vessels. Maddox stood in disbelief as Seraphael extended one hand and the entire battlefield bent like metal under flame. "I am not yours," she said to the Terrans, "and neither is he." With a gesture, she collapsed the command center's broadcast frequency into a cascade of light and static, erasing all traces of her presence from the network. The retrieval team fled in terror, unsure whether they had just tried to capture a goddess or awaken a judgment. Maddox looked at her, breathing hard, gun still warm in his palm. "You could have killed them. I did not wake for vengeance," she replied, "but I will not be chained again." The bunker burned behind them as they fled into the wilderness. No base, no home, no plan. Just Maddox, the human fool who kissed a statue and found a queen, and Seraphale, the 300-year-old queen who refused to be forgotten again. They wandered for days beneath red-leaf trees that hummed at night and whispered in a tongue Maddox couldn't understand. The forest was older than any Terran map recognized, and Seraphale seemed to know it by touch, brushing her hands along the bark like an heir returning to a childhood palace. Maddox followed behind, half soldier, half shadow, wondering what had changed in him since the kiss that shattered history. He had seen war, betrayal, miracles, and ghosts, but nothing rattled him more than the woman who walked barefoot ahead, untouchable and utterly, irrevocably alive. One night, the stars flared orange and violent, an orbital sensor sweep, skimming the atmosphere in search of anomalies. Maddox swore and grabbed his gear, ready to move again, but Seraphale only gazed upward and said, "Let them look. The ones who seek the past always fear what it might still remember." Her words burned with the weight of 1,000 years of abandonment, and Maddox, for reasons he couldn't name, chose not to run. They found shelter in a stone enclave carved into the cliffs, a forgotten shrine overgrown with moss and vines. Inside were murals, cracked and faded, of tall beings wrapped in starcloth and crowned with halos of fire. Beings that looked like her. Seraphale stood silently before one and reached up to trace the outline of a broken crown above the tallest figure. "This was my mother," she said quietly. "She died protecting what was never meant to be possessed." Maddox watched her face as she remembered pain from 3 millennia ago. There was something in her grief that felt terribly human, and something in her silence that made him ache. "Did she know you'd survive?" he asked softly. "She made me promise I would," Seraphale whispered. "But I was too afraid to live until you reminded me how." Outside, thunder rolled across the horizon, unnatural and low, ships breaking through clouds. Maddox loaded his weapon in instinct, but Seraphale placed her hand on his. "They're not ready to see what I've become," she said, "but I'll show them anyway." The enemy descended with engines like storm gods, their black and gold insignias etched into the hulls like declarations of inevitability. Maddox knew these ships. They were from Terran Command's clandestine subjugation division, trained to extract, contain, and erase anomalies too powerful or political to be left unstudied. The soldiers came down like thunder, armored like machines, their visors blank and hearts colder than protocol allowed. Maddox stood at the cliff's edge, rifle in hand, but deep in his gut he knew bullets wouldn't matter today. Seraphale emerged from the shrine, no armor, no weapon, only the white fire of her memory glowing softly around her frame. The soldiers hesitated, not from fear, but confusion. Their targeting systems glitched, flickered, then failed entirely as she stepped forward. One by one, their heads turned, and though not a word had been spoken, something in them remembered what she was before language ever touched their species. "You will not cage me again," she said, her voice not loud but vast. "You will not write me down in your reports or dissect me in silence. I am not a threat. I am a mirror, and today you will decide what you truly are." The command officer lifted a plasma weapon, not out of courage, but trained reflex. Maddox saw it and moved instinctively, stepping in front of her body, ready to take the shot. But before the weapon could fire, it disassembled in the soldier's hands, every screw, coil, and capacitor unraveling like sand caught in wind. A stillness followed, not peace, not surrender, just something older. The soldiers looked at each other, then at their hands, as if waking from a trance. One dropped his helmet. Another fell to his knees, shaking. Maddox stepped forward and said, "You saw it. You felt it. She's not a threat. She's a choice." And that day, in a grove forgotten by maps and guarded by ghosts, no war began. The soldiers left, the ships withdrew, and Seraphale, once buried under millennia of silence, stood beneath the stars she had helped name, free. Maddox walked beside her, their shoulders nearly touching, no longer running from the world but walking through it as something it had never seen before. She didn't thank him, she didn't need to. He was the kiss that had awoken her, and she was the fire that would remake everything. They traveled through the outer wilds of the shattered moon Otherine, where gravity pulls strangely and the bones of forgotten civilizations lay scattered. In moonlight, Seraphael walked with a grace that made the wind hesitate, while Maddox trailed beside her like a breath that had not yet decided if it belonged to war or peace. Neither of them spoke much, but their silence had changed. It no longer carried the weight of strangers, but the rhythm of something growing between them, a fragile trust shaped by fire, shadow, and the ancient longing of two lost worlds trying to understand each other. Sometimes Maddox would glance at her when she wasn't looking, studying the way her fingers brushed ancient stone walls or how her lips moved silently when she passed crumbled shrines. One night, beside a river that shimmered with bioluminescent dust, Seraphael turned to him and asked, "Do you know what your name means?" Maddox shook his head, then grinned like a soldier used to hiding the hurt behind a joke. "Means stubborn idiot in 5 languages and runs toward explosions in 2 dialects of regret," he said. She smiled genuinely this time and leaned closer, her voice low like a memory only meant for one. "In my tongue, it means Modsai, the flame that walks." Her fingers hovered over his chest, just shy of touch, as if asking permission not with words but with the gentleness of presence. "Our prophecies speak of a flame that will awaken the last queen, not to rule, but to remember." Maddox stiffened, startled, the weight of her meaning sinking through him like a chill from another life. "I didn't wake you," he muttered, suddenly uncomfortable. "You were already waiting. I just stumbled in," and she stopped him with a look that wasn't stern but sorrowful. "No one stumbles into destiny," she whispered. "Only those who have carried it their whole lives ever find the door." Later that same night, Seraphael lit a fire with nothing but her breath and a twist of her hand. It burned violet and blue, casting shadows that danced in ways Maddox didn't understand. She asked him to speak a name into the flame, any name. He had forgotten. He said Kara, a girl he once loved back on Earth who had died in a bombed-out med tent. The fire responded not with words, but with a faint echo of laughter, the kind children make when playing outside on sunny days. Seraphael said nothing, only looked at him for a long time before placing her palm on his. "We carry them too," she said, "even when we think we're just surviving." And Maddox, who hadn't cried since he was 13, sat by the flame and said nothing at all. The days that followed were strange and sacred. Everywhere they went, Seraphael seemed to wake things, not in the way machines reboot or systems power on, but as if the very land recognized her bones. The abandoned temples of the Arksari lit as she passed beneath them, casting constellations across cracked ceilings no living soul had seen for centuries. Bridges rebuilt themselves when she stepped toward them. Water sang in harmony with her breath. Maddox couldn't understand any of it, but he stopped trying. He simply walked with her, learned her rhythm, and let his reality shift around hers like a planet pulled into orbit. One morning they reached the ruins of Varellos, a city that had once crowned the skies with spires taller than atmosphere. There, at the center of a broken citadel, stood a throne of petrified root and crystal, waiting as if no time had passed. Seraphael paused before it, eyes dark with something that looked like both grief and refusal. "This was where I died," she said. "Not my body but my will." Maddox stepped beside her. "Do you want it back?" She looked at him and for the first time truly trembled. "I don't know who I am without my silence." That night, he told her the story of how he joined the war not to be a hero, not to be brave, but because Earth was drowning in its own shadows and he needed to run. "I didn't want to fix anything," he confessed. "I just wanted to be too far away to remember what I left behind." Seraphael leaned against his shoulder, her breath warm on his skin, and said, "Then perhaps we are the same to creatures pretending." "We are not." In the quiet that followed, she sang a song in a language no human had ever heard, one that bent the stars and made the wind fall still. It was not a song of glory or vengeance or love. It was a song of becoming, of stone melting into flesh, of time bowing to hope, of 2 stories, one tan, one immortal, unfolding into a single truth. And Maddox knew as he listened that this was not a song for the galaxy. It was for him, and in the silence after it ended, he whispered her name, not as a legend, not as a mystery, but as someone who no longer wanted to lose her. "Seraphael," he said, "stay." She did not answer with words. She kissed him, not as a queen, not as a ghost, but as a woman who had waited 3,000 years to be remembered by the fire she was promised. The stars were not the same when dawn broke as Maddox and Seraphael stood upon the cliff that overlooked the ruins of Borellos. The sky split not in thunder, not in war, but in brilliance. Columns of light, ancient and resonant, bloomed from the earth in places no Terran scanner had ever mapped, as if the world, long asleep, had decided to wake because its queen had remembered her name. Maddox felt it before he saw it, the subtle vibration in the soles of his boots, the sudden shifting of bird song into harmony with tones older than creation itself. Seraphael breathed deeply and closed her eyes. "The veil is thinning," she whispered. "They will feel it soon. The old empires, the new tyrants, the machines that forgot their builders. Even those who buried me under silence will remember." Down in the valleys below, sensors activated. Satellites that hadn't responded in years suddenly pinged Terran orbit. Ships from both Earth and alien factions began their slow, hesitant descent, drawn by fear and something else, something they couldn't name but had felt in their bones like a storm long prophesied. Maddox, standing beside her, didn't flinch. "They'll come," he said. "They'll bring weapons, laws, lies. They'll try to bind you again." Seraphael's expression was soft, but it was not afraid. "I'm not the same queen they buried. I am not the crown. I am not the stone. I am what rose from them." They returned to the shrine, where the flames still burned. Violet. Maddox began reinforcing the perimeter out of old soldier's instinct while Seraphael knelt at the fire and sang a single note, long and crystalline. In the distance, trees bent toward the sound. The river froze mid-flow. Even the light shifted, as though obeying a rhythm the universe had nearly forgotten. And from the sky came not missiles, but a single voice across every frequency, from every corner of space. Identity anomaly confirmed. Subject: Seraphael. Origin: pre-console era. Engage or stand down. It wasn't Earth's voice. It was something older, the intergalactic archive itself. The cold, artificial memory of the galaxy had awakened to verify a truth no one was meant to remember. Maddox stepped forward, activated his comlink, and without blinking answered, "She's not an anomaly. She's the reason you exist." Silence followed. Then, without another sound, the stars blinked once, then dimmed out. In the days that followed, fleets did arrive, but none dared descend. The council debated from their glass towers, hiding behind encrypted protocols and shadow fleets. Earth's Prime Command sent scouts who returned wide-eyed and wordless. And throughout it all, Seraphael remained seated by the flame that would not die, her hands outstretched, receiving pilgrims, first animals, then voices, then finally beings. They came not to conquer, but to understand. Children arrived, first alien and human, drawn by dreams they could not explain. They listened to her stories and painted pictures of stars with wings and hearts shaped like lanterns. Then came the exiles, the broken ones, the veterans like Maddox who had fought too long to believe in anything but death. One by one, she taught them what Maddox had taught her: the courage to stay awake when the world begged you to sleep. One evening, Seraphael walked into the river barefoot, eyes closed, and said, "The stone has become light." Maddox followed, ankle deep, unsure if she was talking about herself or the world. She reached for his hand, not as a savior, not as a symbol, but simply as someone who had learned to trust the soul that kissed her back to life. They stood in the water until the sky turned gold. Ships circled above, but none descended. And then, unexpectedly, impossibly, flowers bloomed in the river, glowing from within like memories born again. Seraphael smiled, and Maddox, in awe, finally spoke the words he had carried in silence for too long. "You're not a myth anymore." She leaned into him, her lips at his ear, and replied, "Then write me into the future." And so he did, not with weapons, not with blood, but with presence. A human soldier who kissed a statue and found a queen. A queen who remembered who she was because a stubborn flame refused to let her die forgotten. Together, they became something the galaxy would never understand but could no longer ignore. And across every world, in every broken place, someone whispered the story of the man who kissed the past awake and held its hand into tomorrow.